Your soulmate just ended their relationship. But what they realized about you after the breakup will shock you. Don't scroll away from this yet, because the breakup was not the shocking part. The shocking part came afterward, when the person you love finally sat alone with no one left to blame, no relationship left to hide inside, and no distraction strong enough to keep one particular truth from rising to the surface. In this fictional story, your soulmate has just ended a relationship. Maybe everyone around them thinks they know why. Maybe even your soulmate thought they understood why. They told themselves it had become unhealthy. They told themselves the connection had run its course. They told themselves they simply needed a fresh start. All of that may have been true. But when the door finally closed and the noise disappeared, they realized something they had been avoiding for a very long time. The breakup did not suddenly make them think of you. You had already been there, quietly, in the background of their heart long before the relationship ended. And that realization terrified them. Because it forced them to ask one question they were not ready to answer. If their heart had been comparing everything to the way they felt around you, then what exactly had they been trying to protect by staying where they were? It started after midnight. The argument was already over. The final words had been said. Maybe there had been tears. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe an agreement that both people knew was coming for months. Whatever the final conversation looked like, it ended with silence. The kind of silence that feels unfamiliar after a relationship has occupied so much emotional space. Your soulmate sat alone. Their phone was nearby. No one to text automatically. No partner to explain themselves to. No need to pretend the relationship was still fixable. And for the first time, they could actually feel what had been underneath the conflict. Not only sadness. Relief. Then guilt for feeling relieved. Then confusion. Then something else. Your face. They did not understand why at first. They told themselves it was random. Maybe because they had spoken to you recently. Maybe because some song reminded them of you. Maybe because the mind looks for comfort after endings. But then a specific memory returned. A conversation between you. One that seemed small at the time. You had been listening to them complain about something, perhaps without even knowing how strained their relationship had become. You did not tell them what to do. You did not insult the person they were with. You did not say, "You deserve better," in a way that tried to pull them toward you. You simply listened. And after they finished, you said something like, "You shouldn't have to disappear inside yourself just to keep the peace." That sentence came back after the breakup. Hard. Because they had. They had disappeared inside themselves. They had become quieter. More careful. They had learned to measure every word. They had begun avoiding difficult topics because confrontation felt exhausting. And somewhere along the way, they had started accepting emotional conditions they once said they would never tolerate. But around you? They felt different. That was the first realization. Not that you were perfect. Not that the person they left was entirely wrong. But around you, your soulmate noticed they did not have to shrink themselves in the same way. They could speak. You sometimes disagreed. You sometimes challenged them. But disagreement with you did not automatically make them feel like the connection was about to collapse. That difference stayed with them. They stood up, walked around the room, then sat down again. They tried not to think about you. That only made it worse. Because now memories came faster. The way you noticed when they were tired. The way you did not always accept the first, "I'm fine." The way you could become quiet yourself if you felt disrespected. The way you never seemed interested in competing with anyone for their attention. And then another memory. One that made their chest tighten. Months earlier, maybe during a difficult phase in their relationship, your soulmate had become distant from you. Not because they stopped caring. Because caring about you while being committed elsewhere made them uncomfortable. They knew something was changing inside them. They did not want to admit it. So they reduced contact. Shorter messages. Longer gaps. More careful conversations. They told themselves they were doing the responsible thing. Maybe in some ways, they were. But what they never told themselves was how much it hurt. They missed you. And now, after the relationship ended, the memory of that distance felt completely different. They had not been protecting themselves from you. They had been protecting themselves from the truth about you. Stay with me here, because this is where the breakup becomes something much bigger than an ending. Your soulmate suddenly understood that you had represented something they were afraid to look at too closely. A contrast. Whenever they were around you, they became more aware of what was missing elsewhere. Not because you intentionally compared yourself. You may not even have known what was happening. But your presence exposed things. It exposed how much they wanted emotional honesty. How much they wanted to laugh without tension underneath it. How much they wanted someone to ask questions because they were curious, not because they were searching for something to criticize. And those desires had become harder to ignore. The person they were with may have sensed it too. Maybe not you specifically. But something. Distance. Restlessness. A part of your soulmate that seemed elsewhere. Maybe this contributed to arguments. Maybe not. But now your soulmate could finally admit that during the last months of that relationship, there were moments when they wondered what it would feel like to talk to you instead. That realization created guilt. A lot of it. Because they did not want to be someone who emotionally moved on before ending one chapter. They did not want to rewrite the past just because the relationship was over. So they pushed back internally. No. This breakup was not about them. And maybe that was true. You were not the reason. The relationship had its own problems. Its own history. Its own reasons for ending. But then came the second realization. You may not have caused the breakup, but thinking about you helped them recognize what they wanted after it. That was different. Very different. They sat in the dark staring at their phone. Your name was somewhere inside it. They wanted to open your conversation. Did not. Because what would they say? Hey, I just ended my relationship and now I can't stop thinking about you. No. That would be unfair. Too much. Too soon. It could make you feel like a rebound. And deep down, Your soulmate knew you deserved better than being used as emotional anesthesia. So they stayed silent. But staying silent did not stop the realization from unfolding. They started asking themselves what exactly they felt for you. Attraction? Yes. Probably. Comfort? Definitely. Attachment? More than they had admitted. But there was another layer. Respect. They respected you. That mattered. They respected the way you had handled boundaries. Maybe you knew they were unavailable and never pushed. Maybe you deliberately stepped back at times because you did not want to be involved in something complicated. At the time, your soulmate may have interpreted that distance as a sign you cared less. Now they saw something else. Character. You could care and still refuse to build closeness in the wrong circumstances. That realization shocked them. Because perhaps part of them had secretly wanted you to make it easier. Wanted you to say something obvious. Wanted you to give them a reason to cross an emotional line. You did not. And now, instead of resenting you for that, they admired you. You had protected yourself. Maybe even protected them. That thought made your soulmate look at your recent interactions differently. Were you quieter because you had stopped caring? Or because you knew their situation was not yours to interfere with? Had you been holding something too? The possibility made their heart race. But again, they stopped themselves. Do not turn uncertainty into fantasy. They had just ended a relationship. Their emotions were raw. They needed honesty, not projection. So they tried to sleep. They could not. Around 2 in the morning, they opened your conversation. Old messages. Some funny. Some deeper. They scrolled farther than they intended. Then they found one conversation that made them stop. You had once told them. I think people stay in familiar pain because unfamiliar peace feels too risky. They had laughed at the time. Maybe responded with some joke. Now the sentence felt almost prophetic inside this fictional story. Familiar pain. Unfamiliar peace. Had they stayed longer than they should have because dysfunction was familiar? Had the possibility of something healthier actually frightened them? And was that part of why you affected them so strongly? Because you represented unfamiliar peace? That thought was almost too intimate to handle. Your soulmate put the phone down. Then picked it back up. They read your words again. And suddenly tears appeared. Not because they wanted to jump from one relationship into another. Because they realized how long they had been living without certain things they genuinely needed. Emotional safety. Honesty. Being able to speak without constantly calculating the response. Being known without being managed. And somehow you had shown them glimpses of those things without ever promising anything. That was when the third realization arrived. The most uncomfortable one. They had been jealous of you. Not jealous over you. Jealous of you. Your ability to walk away from things that did not feel right. Your boundaries. Your willingness to be alone rather than force connection. Maybe your soulmate had interpreted those qualities as emotional distance before. Now they saw strength. They thought about how many times they stayed somewhere because leaving felt like failure. How many times they compromised beyond what felt healthy because they did not want to admit something was ending. You seemed different. You could mourn and still leave. Love and still say no. Care and still choose yourself. That had always unsettled them. Now they knew why. Because part of them wanted to become more like that. If you're enjoying this fictional soulmate-style emotional story, subscribe and stay close, because what your soulmate realizes next is the part that shocks even them. The breakup made them understand that you were not simply someone they wanted. You had become connected to the version of themselves they were trying to become. Morning arrived. They barely slept. The breakup still hurt. Of course it did. Even unhealthy relationships contain memories. Inside jokes. Habits. Shared routines. There was grief. But underneath the grief, another truth had become impossible to ignore. Your soulmate did not want to repeat the same relationship pattern again. Not with you. Not with anyone. That mattered. Because their first impulse might have been to run toward you immediately. But they stopped. Why? Because if they truly cared, they could not use you to avoid grieving. They needed to process. Take responsibility. Understand what went wrong. Otherwise, they might bring the same wounds into something new and then blame the connection when old patterns returned. That was surprisingly mature. And maybe the first sign that thinking about you was changing them. They did not want you only as a source of comfort. They wanted to become someone capable of showing up differently if the connection ever became real. That realization made them ask, what would I need to change? Not for you to choose them. For themselves. They wrote things down. Maybe mentally. Maybe actually. They needed to communicate before resentment built. Stop assuming people should understand what they did not say. Stop treating conflict like evidence that love was ending. Stop staying in situations simply because leaving felt embarrassing. Stop confusing emotional intensity with emotional compatibility. And then they added one more. Stop hiding behind uncertainty when they already knew what they felt. That one was about you. They knew. Maybe not the entire future. But enough. You mattered. They were attracted to you. They trusted you in ways that frightened them. They wanted to know what this could become. And perhaps most importantly, they did not want to keep pretending otherwise. But they also knew timing mattered. They could not end a relationship and immediately place the emotional weight of their new realization onto you. So for several days, they stayed quiet. Not avoidance. Processing. That difference mattered. But because you had experienced their distance before, you had no way of knowing the difference. Maybe you noticed something changed. Maybe mutual people mentioned the breakup. Maybe you heard indirectly. And when you did, you felt something complicated. Concern. Curiosity. Maybe hope that you did not want to admit. But you did not rush toward them. Again. Boundary. You waited. That silence affected your soulmate. Part of them expected you to message. Maybe. Are you okay? When nothing came, they wondered whether you no longer cared. Then they caught themselves. Old pattern. Assumption. They had just promised themselves they would stop expecting others to read their needs. If they wanted to talk to you, maybe they had to reach. Not sit in silence testing whether you cared. So eventually, they opened your conversation. Typed. Hey. Deleted. Too casual. Then. I don't know if you heard. Deleted. Too ominous. They laughed at themselves. Same habit. Trying to control every possible interpretation. Finally, they wrote. I wanted to tell you something directly instead of assuming you already heard it from someone else. They stopped. Then. My relationship ended. Their thumb hovered. They pressed send. Delivered. Immediately, vulnerability hit. Would you think they were reaching out because they wanted something? Would you think this was inappropriate? Would you ignore it? Your response came after some time. I'm sorry. Are you okay? Simple. Compassionate. No excitement. No obvious hidden agenda. Exactly you. Your soulmate stared at the message longer than necessary. They replied. I don't know yet. Honest. Then. But I think ending it was the right decision. You read that. Do you want to talk about it? There it was. An invitation. Not pressure. Your soulmate almost poured everything out. Then stopped. Not because they wanted to hide. Because they did not want to make you emotionally responsible for helping them process their ex. That was not fair. So they wrote. Maybe a little. But I don't want to turn you into my breakup therapist. You almost laughed. That's probably wise. The humor helped. Your soulmate smiled for the first time that day. And just that tiny moment reminded them why talking to you felt different. No performance. No walking on eggshells. Then you said something that surprised them. I'm glad you told me yourself. They stared. Why? Your answer. Because I probably would have heard. That confirmed there were mutual circles. Your soulmate asked. Would you have messaged me? You took time. Then. I don't know. That answer stung slightly. But it was honest. You continued. I didn't want you to think I was waiting for the relationship to end. That sentence made their chest tighten. Of course. You had been careful. Maybe too careful at times. But they suddenly understood the dignity behind it. You did not want to become the person standing outside someone else's relationship hoping for the door to open. Your soulmate replied. I never thought that. You answered. Good. Then changed the subject slightly. How are you sleeping? They laughed. Terribly. And the conversation became gentle. No confession. Not yet. But after it ended, your soulmate felt something unfamiliar. They did not feel the desperate rush of a rebound. They felt calm. That scared them almost more. Because they had spent years associating attraction with chaos. This felt different. They could talk to you and not feel consumed. They felt clearer afterward, not more confused. And then the biggest realization arrived. Maybe the thing they loved most about you was not how intensely you made them feel. Maybe it was who they became when they felt safe around you. Less defensive. More honest. More curious. Less interested in winning. More interested in understanding. That was shocking. Because suddenly love did not look like finding someone who created the strongest emotional storm. It looked like becoming more yourself in their presence. Your soulmate sat with that. And for the first time, they said the sentence privately. I think I love them. Not the ex. You. They froze after saying it. The words felt terrifying because the breakup was fresh. They questioned themselves immediately. Was this rebound thinking? Had they idealized you because they were hurting? Maybe. They needed to be careful. So instead of running toward the feeling, they observed it. Days passed. Then weeks. The grief softened. But the thought of you did not disappear. That mattered. If you were only emotional escape, perhaps the intensity should have faded as they stabilized. Instead, the feeling became quieter. Clearer. More grounded. They noticed they did not only think about you when lonely. They thought about you when good things happened. When they learned something. When they laughed. When they imagined plans. And that distinction gave them confidence. They were not simply seeking rescue. You were becoming part of the future they naturally imagined. One evening, they were with their best friend. The friend knew about the breakup. They asked, "How are you doing?" Your soulmate said, "Better." Then the friend gave them a look. What? Nothing. What? The friend smiled. You keep looking at your phone. Your soulmate immediately knew. They tried to play it off. The friend asked, "Is it them?" Your soulmate did not answer. That was enough. The friend leaned back. Wow. What? You actually waited. Your soulmate looked confused. For what? To do anything. The friend knew more than they realized. Maybe they had noticed your soulmate's feelings before the breakup. Your person became defensive. I didn't do anything. Exactly. That surprised them. The friend continued. I thought the second the relationship ended, you'd run toward them. Your soulmate became quiet. I didn't want to do that. Why? Because I didn't want them to feel like a replacement. The friend nodded slowly. That's probably the first smart thing you've done in this whole situation. Your soulmate laughed. Thanks. Then the friend became serious. But are you going to tell them eventually? Your soulmate's chest tightened. There it was. The next step. They had processed. Waited. Observed their feelings. The feeling remained. So what now? They answered. I think I need to. The friend asked. What do you want to tell them? Your soulmate did not say, I love you, immediately. Instead, you came back because you knew that message from their ex changed everything. Your soulmate had finally admitted that the breakup forced them to see you differently. They had waited before rushing toward you because they did not want you to become a rebound. They had told you that their feelings did not disappear after the breakup, they became clearer. And just when both of you agreed to meet, someone from the relationship that had just ended reached out directly to you and wrote, I think there's something you need to know before you believe what they're telling you. Your heart tightened immediately. You stared at the message for several seconds, wondering whether to open the door to a conversation that could either clarify everything or completely destroy the fragile trust that had only just begun to form. Stay with me here, because what their ex was about to tell you was not a simple accusation, and it was not some dramatic secret that instantly made your soulmate look guilty. It was something much more complicated. Something that forced you to ask whether two completely different versions of the same relationship could both contain truth. You replied cautiously, what do you mean? The answer came quickly, they were thinking about you before we ended. You froze. Those words hit differently because your soulmate had already told you that you had been in their mind before the breakup. But hearing it from the ex turned that private admission into something heavier. You did not know how much. You did not know when. You did not know whether your existence had quietly become part of the tension between them. So you asked, did they tell you that? The ex answered, not directly. That mattered. Then how do you know? There was a pause. Because I watched them change. Another message followed. Every time your name came up, they acted different. Your stomach tightened. The ex continued, they were more distracted. More protective of their phone. They started comparing things. That last sentence unsettled you. Comparing. You asked, comparing what? The answer took longer. Us. Silence. Then, they never said, you should be more like them. But I could feel it. They started wanting things from the relationship they hadn't asked for before. That could mean many things. Maybe your soulmate had started wanting better communication after experiencing it with you. Maybe more emotional openness. Maybe peace instead of conflict. But from the ex's side, that change may have felt like rejection. You read carefully, resisting the urge to accept either side as complete truth. Then the ex wrote, I think they emotionally left before they physically left. That sentence hit hard. Because if it were true, you did not want to become part of a story where your connection grew inside the emotional space of someone else's relationship. You cared about your soulmate. But you also cared about what kind of beginning this would be. You asked, did they cheat? Direct. Necessary. The response came quickly. Not physically. Not that I know of. Your chest loosened slightly, but not completely. The ex added, but sometimes emotional distance hurts just as much. That was fair. Whatever happened between them belonged to their relationship. The absence of physical betrayal did not automatically mean nobody had been hurt. You replied, why are you telling me? The ex took a long time. Then, Because I don't want you thinking everything between us was terrible and you somehow rescued them. That sentence immediately stood out. Your soulmate had never told you that. They had specifically avoided making you feel like a replacement or savior. So you answered honestly, they didn't tell me that. The ex seemed surprised. They didn't blame me? No, another pause. They actually said the relationship had its own reasons for ending and that they needed time before talking to me about their feelings. The ex did not answer immediately. Maybe that was not the version they expected. Finally, then maybe they're being more honest with you than they were with me. That sentence carried sadness rather than hostility. And suddenly this conversation felt less like a warning and more like two people trying to understand different sides of the same person. You could have hidden this message from your soulmate. Part of you considered it. You did not want to create more drama. Maybe you could process it alone. But then you remembered what both of you had just started building. Honesty before assumption. So you sent your soulmate a message. Your ex contacted me. Their heart dropped immediately. They replied, "What?" You sent a screenshot of the opening line. Their response came almost instantly, "I'm sorry." You asked, "Why are you apologizing? Did you know they would contact me?" "No, then, but I'm sorry you got pulled into this." That answer mattered. They did not immediately insult the ex. Did not tell you to block them. Did not demand loyalty before you had even processed what was said. You wrote, "They told me you were thinking about me before the breakup." Long pause. Your soulmate stared at that sentence because now there was no avoiding it. "That's true," they replied. You felt your chest tighten. Honesty. But the answer opened another question. How long? They took time. Longer than I'm proud of. That was not comforting, but it was real. You asked, "Were you emotionally cheating with me?" Their reply took several minutes. They knew the answer required care. Finally, "I don't think I crossed certain lines with you directly. I tried to pull back when I realized my feelings were becoming serious. But I do think I was emotionally comparing the relationship to what I felt around you, and I should have dealt with that more honestly in my relationship." That was nuanced. No easy self-exoneration. Your soulmate continued, "I don't want to call myself innocent just because I didn't physically cheat." Another message. I became emotionally unavailable near the end, and that hurt them. You stared at those words. This was perhaps the first time you had heard them speak about the breakup without protecting their own image. They admitted impact. They admitted failure. And strangely, that made you feel safer, not less safe. Because perfection would have been suspicious. Accountability was more believable. You asked, "Did I cause the breakup?" Their reply was immediate. No, then they slowed down. But thinking about you made it harder for me to ignore things that were already wrong. Important distinction. They continued, "You didn't make me leave. You showed me, without trying, that some of the things I had stopped asking for were things I actually needed." You read that carefully. Like what? Your soulmate replied, "Being able to talk without every disagreement feeling like a threat." Another line. Feeling like I could be quiet without being punished. Another. Being listened to without having to explain why my feelings were valid. Then, but I also need to be fair. My ex had needs I stopped meeting too. That surprised you. They were not turning the story into hero and villain. Like what? You asked. They answered, presence. Clarity. Effort. I withdrew instead of ending things when I probably knew we were not working anymore. Silence. That was unfair. You sat with that. The ex had said they emotionally left before physically leaving. Your soulmate was essentially admitting part of that was true. But they were also saying the relationship had been breaking independently of you. Two truths. Complex, uncomfortable, but possible. You wrote, "Why didn't you tell them about me?" Your soulmate replied, "Because I didn't fully understand what I felt at first. Then, and when I did, I became ashamed of it." That word mattered. Shame often creates secrecy. They continued. I thought if I admitted I had feelings for someone else, it would make everything we had meaningless. You asked, did it? No, their answer came quickly. That relationship mattered. It also needed to end. Both can be true. That was emotionally mature. You wondered whether the breakup had forced them to learn this or whether they had always known it quietly. Then they wrote, "I'm also afraid you're going to think I'm only coming toward you because I couldn't make that work." There it was. Their fear. You answered honestly, "I am wondering that." They did not become defensive. You should. Pause. That's why I waited. Another. And why I don't want to rush you now. That grounded the conversation. If you're enjoying this fictional soulmate-style emotional story, subscribe and stay close, because what happens next is the part that truly shocks you. Their ex reveals one specific moment involving you that your soulmate never knew they witnessed. And it proves your presence had become part of the relationship long before anyone admitted it. You messaged the ex again. Did they ever talk about me directly? The reply, once. Your stomach dropped. What did they say? There was a long pause. We had an argument. Another message. I told them I felt like they were somewhere else emotionally. You waited. Then, they said, "There's someone who makes me remember what I'm like when I'm not constantly defending myself." Your entire body went still. That sentence sounded like something your soulmate would say. Maybe not your name. But clearly you. You asked, did they say who? No, then, I knew. Your heart raced. How? The ex replied, because I had seen you together once. There it was. A moment. You asked when. The date came. You remembered. It had been months earlier. You and your soulmate were somewhere ordinary. Maybe a gathering. Maybe coffee with other people around. Nothing inappropriate. But you remembered laughing together. One conversation that felt unusually easy. You had no idea the ex had seen it. The ex continued, you weren't touching. Nothing happened. That almost made it worse. You frowned. Why? The answer: because they looked peaceful. That word again. Peace. The exact thing your soulmate said they realized after the breakup. The ex wrote, "I hadn't seen that look in a long time." Suddenly you felt sadness for someone you had never intended to hurt. This was not triumph. Not validation. It was a reminder that relationships can end painfully even without a clean villain. You wrote, "I'm sorry." The ex replied, "You don't owe me that." Another pause. "You didn't do anything then, but I needed you to know they were emotionally affected by you before they became free to pursue anything." That was fair information. You thanked them for telling you. Then the ex said one last thing. "Just make sure they don't turn you into the answer to everything that was wrong with us." That warning stayed with you. Because it was wise. You could not become a symbol. A perfect opposite. A fantasy solution. You needed to be loved as a real person, not as relief from the past. You sent your soulmate that final part. Your ex said something I think matters. They asked what? You wrote, "They said not to let you turn me into the answer to everything that was wrong with your relationship." Your soulmate stared at the message for a long time. Then replied, "That's fair." You asked, "Do you think you're doing that?" They took several minutes. Maybe a little in the beginning. Honest again. "After the breakup, I noticed every way you felt different from what I had just left." Another line. "That doesn't mean I only care about you because you're different from them." Pause. "But I think comparison was part of how I first understood the contrast." You replied, "And now?" They answered, "Now I'm trying to see you as you." That sentence mattered. Not peace. Not escape. Not someone who rescues me. You. You asked, "What does that mean?" They began describing you. Your impatience when plans change. Your tendency to overthink. The way you sometimes shut down too. Your humor. Your boundaries. The way you can be stubborn. The way you sometimes need reassurance even though you hate asking for it. This was not idealization. They had noticed your humanity. "I don't think you're perfect," they wrote. You replied, "Good." They laughed. "You're very annoying sometimes." Better. The tension softened. Then you asked the hardest question. "If I wasn't in the picture, would you still have ended the relationship?" Your soulmate stopped. This was important. They thought carefully. Yes. Then, maybe not at exactly the same time. That was an honest distinction. "Why?" you asked. "Because I had gotten used to staying unhappy." Pause. Seeing another way of relating made the problem harder to ignore. So your presence may have accelerated clarity. But it did not create the underlying incompatibility. You could live with that truth, perhaps. Still, you needed more. "Do you regret the way it ended?" They replied, "Yes." Another message. Not that it ended. The way I handled the last part. That mattered too. You said, "I don't want to become your reward for finally leaving." Your soulmate's chest tightened. You're not. You replied, then don't rush me. They answered, I won't. And don't make me responsible for proving the breakup was worth it. Your soulmate paused. That was deep. Sometimes someone leaves a relationship and unconsciously pressures the next person to justify the decision. I understand, they wrote. If this doesn't work between us, it won't mean I should have stayed where I was. Excellent. That sentence made you relax. Their breakup had to stand on its own truth. Your connection could not carry the responsibility of validating it. You agreed to keep the meeting you had planned. But now the conversation would be different. Not simply romantic. You needed to talk about timing, grief, boundaries, the past. When you met, your soulmate looked nervous. You were too. The first thing they said was, I'm sorry you had to hear part of my breakup from someone else. You replied, I'm glad they told me some of it. That surprised them. Really? You nodded. Because it made me ask better questions. Your soulmate accepted that. Then you asked directly, are you actually ready for something new? They did not immediately say yes. Good. They thought. I'm ready to be honest about wanting something new. Pause. I don't know if I'm fully healed. That was realistic. You replied, nobody is fully healed. They nodded. But I also don't want to use that as an excuse to rush. You asked, what would slow look like? They answered. No pretending we're already a couple because we admitted feelings. No making you responsible for my breakup emotions. And if I start comparing you to them, I tell you and I stop. You appreciated that. Then they asked you, what are you afraid of? You answered honestly. Being the transition. Their face softened. I understand. I don't want to be the person you need because you don't know who you are alone yet. That hit. Your soulmate had barely spent time single. Maybe they needed solitude. They knew it. I think I need to learn that too, they said. You asked, then why are we doing this? Good question. They replied, because I don't think the only options are rush into a relationship or pretend nothing exists. That made sense. There could be a middle that was honest rather than ambiguous. You could acknowledge feelings while allowing time. You agreed on something simple. Keep talking. No exclusivity promise yet. No grand future. No hiding feelings either. If one person changed their mind, say it. If grief became overwhelming, say it. If the X situation became complicated, say it. This was slower than the fantasy. Healthier too. Weeks passed. Your soulmate had hard days. Sometimes they missed the relationship they ended. That shocked them at first. How could they miss something they knew needed to end? But grief is not proof you made the wrong choice. They told you when it happened. I'm having a sad day about the breakup. You could have felt threatened. Instead you asked, do you want space or company? They replied, maybe space. You gave it. And importantly, they returned later. They did not use grief to create indefinite distance. Another day, they admitted, "I had a memory of my ex and felt guilty because I care about you." You replied, "You're allowed to have history." That sentence helped them breathe. Real love does not require amnesia.